All right, this should be part 4 and the final part for the critique for your depth of field projects. We'll get through this and then we'll hopefully be on to our next project. So let's get this going. Okay, we start off with this nice smiling portrait of this young lad out in front of a field of what I'm assuming are soccer players, since there are soccer balls all over the place. So let's see what this has done in terms of minimal depth of field. It has limited depth of field. The players behind are a little more out of focus than the person in front is. You do have an exposure problem with this. The flare from the sun is just close enough that it's killing your contrast. Any light that is able to strike the front element of your lens will find some of it refracted down into the barrel of the lens, where it's just unfocused, diffuse light, and will start filling in shadows. You don't have to see the little lens flare that mirrors the iris in your camera in order to have a lens flare. It's just there and it's killing contrast. So solution number 1 is a really good lens hood that will block all of that out. So let's see what else we have. Oh, we've got a couple of little conflicting elements here. This nice vertical portrait would have really been just as well rendered with a more of a vertical. You can still see the kids in back. You still know what he's doing, but we don't have all of this other extraneous stuff that's getting in the way. So sometimes it's easy to forget that you can tip your camera sideways and nothing will fall out. So do really think about what is your main subject and how should I orient the camera for that. Also, we do need here to build a little contrast back into the background and get rid of some of this. Just as you've seen in some of the other shots, most of this could probably have been fixed in Camera Raw. There's a little bit of work to do with this one yet. But yes, it is starting to do the minimal depth of field. You could have opened up even more, though, and thrown these a little more out of focus. Okay, let's go on to the next one. Another playground shot. This one with more depth of field. We also have a problem here with washed out buildings in here. This, again, could have been solved with an application of the highlight filter, or the highlight slider in Adobe Camera Raw. You could probably bring tone back into this. The deeper depth of field does work. You've got all these kids, everything is in focus, you're showing what's happening. From a picture standpoint, the real issue is what is happening. These folks are just milling around, paying no attention to anything. They're not part of a game or something going on. So really, here's where your shot is, where these 3 kids are. Most of this is extraneous, and we could concentrate right on it. But it does show deep depth of field. But it would also do that if, in fact, your shot were more like that. Okay, maybe after 50 or 60 projects, I'm going to get you guys to be thinking about this. Where is the picture and where is the movement and what's it doing? There is some motion blur here which indicates that he's moving, that maybe you were panning with him. That's a very, very good use of that. But you've got him dead centered and he's actually a little closer to this leading edge than he is to the trailing edge. And that's almost constraining his movement. So if we had composed this a little differently, to where now there's more space in front of him, we can have the same portrait shot, but there's a little more movement in it, and it's a little less static with a really simple trim. Start paying very close attention to that. In this case, like I said at the start of these critiques, I'm grading based on whether you use depth of field right and followed my instructions. But from now on, not only do you have to do that, you've got to really work at making a good photograph. Something that really works compositionally, that works in virtually every way necessary. Exposure-wise, composition, all of the elements we'll be dealing with. So when you're shooting and when you're editing, think about that. Well, this is an interesting, rich, colored photograph. It looks almost like a little HDR in the color. It's something of a problem. There's some really washed out areas in here. Could be because of the haze, or it could be simply exposure. And we've got over on the side, look at this little sliver of stuff that's starting to take your eye away. You want to know, what is this? What is all this stuff? When you're doing these, pay attention to every corner. What's going on in the corner, on the edges? Do we have anything like here that's a little potentially distracting? What can we do to make this a little better? Number one, let's get rid of that. Do we really need all of this sky to make our statement here? I don't think so. Because what we're looking at is this area right in here. The sky isn't really doing much for us. And we could bring this up just a little. And tighten up on this shot just a bit. Then we could look at seeing what we could do to make our exposure better. So if we start in with our normal process, you can see we've got a highlight going off the scale here, which is here, which means you're really a little overexposed, especially since we've got some space down here in the shadows. So if we bring that in a little bit, we'll say okay there. Then we'll come into image adjustments, curves. And we need to bring this area down a little bit. If we hold down the Alt key and click there, you can see where that circle on the line is. Here's the area we need to bring down a little. And we can bring these shadows back up. So now we've put some detail in there. And it's starting to clean this up quite a bit. So again, look at all of the corners, look at the edges of your shot, and start to say, where really is this picture? We're looking up through all this foliage at this structure, but we can't really see the structure. So is the story that it's hidden in the canyon, or is the story about this wall, this area in front of it? What's the story about? Think about that. Why are you doing this? In addition to simply making a technical shot to satisfy the cilial instructor. Well, it's a nice shallow depth of field, and of course the name of your book here, Up Close and Personal, makes it almost humorous the way you've done. It's too bad that this is blown out. That's a real problem with that reflection on this highly shiny book jacket. A slight change in angle might have solved that, as it did on these. And over here we've got some really empty dead space and this little item up in the corner. It might be nice to have elevated this shot about an inch. This stuff isn't doing anything for us, but then we could see what the rest of this says. So if you just raised up a little bit, that could have helped a lot. And we really do not need that. What we need to show is that this is in a library. This area is pretty dead. So we can tighten up a shot like that pretty easily, pretty quickly. The ideal is to do it in the camera, but at some point, do it. I've left this little bright area here. I think I would get rid of it. There we go. I don't want anything to catch my eye to take it away from the main part of my shot over here. I can scan this quickly, being out of focus, and say, okay, I'm in a library, I'm somewhere where there are lots of books on shelves or items on shelves. Now, what has the photographer given me to look at? And what is he or she trying to tell me with this shot? Okay. You could even darken this a little. You could vignette this to bring this down, because this whole area is brighter than the books. Let's try the next one. Wow, this one is kind of bizarre and maybe a little bit creepy. What is this weird guy? Boy, you have weird neighbors. If this is the guy on the other side of the fence, he's either been out in the sun way too long or is perhaps from another planet looking over into your space. This is really kind of a funny shot in many ways. You can take advantage of that bizarre juxtaposition. I'm assuming this is the maximum depth of field, since it says that, and because almost everything from the foreground here to the background in these trees is pretty sharp, so it certainly satisfies that. To me, the shot is right here. It's this bizarre face looking over what appears to be a fence. Well, okay, but I don't need to be distracted by going, does he live here? If so, I want to know more about that. Is this his weird little Quonset house, or what's going on? So again, the solution is simple. Move in tighter to it. Ideally in the camera, so we're not throwing away all this space. There's a really nice flower on this bush, but it's not doing anything to tell us the main story. So now we can really concentrate on this, and we don't have things taking our eye away from it. We could decide on our own, what about this little flower? What about these stalks? Are they distracting? Maybe. Maybe not. If they were, then I'll just deal with this one for sake of time. But all you would need to do is grab the spot healing brush and let's make a smaller brush. And things like that are gone. So use those to clean up anything that you don't need or that's distracting. Nice flower shot, really nice bouquet back there. This looks almost like one of the old Petzval lenses with the swirling bouquet. It makes for a really nice macro shot. You did a nice job with it. But again, where is the shot? It's right here in this cool flower. This type of material can be nice. It creates a sense of background, a sense of movement, so that it's not static. This, not so much. Maybe moving around a little bit when you shot it. When you're on things like this, you usually hear people say bracket the exposure. I would suggest to you that you bracket the angles that you shoot it. Try it from different angles. around to the side, higher, lower, all around. Capture all of those. Pretty soon you'll start to develop an eye for looking for what you want, and you won't shoot them all. But for now, shoot all of them. Shoot every option you've got. And then we'll pick what's good for this shot. So let's come in a little bit. If we wanted to keep it a horizontal shot, then we could crop something like that. This is such a strong vertical. I'm not sure we need to worry about making it horizontal. I want to leave just a hint of that so you can tell this isn't a lone flower in the middle of nowhere. And then we can start moving in on our flower. And at this point, then it might be nice to vignette this. So let's try. Let's do our old standard duplicate layer. We'll make this a multiply layer. Now, normally, in the past, when we've done this, you'll notice that you hopefully will have noticed that we've just gone to the white brush, we've made a layer mask, gone to the black brush, rather, and just lighten the area. Let me show you a way to do that kind of from the opposite side. So when I make a layer mask, I'm going to hold down the Alt or the Option key. And now I'm back to the original look, and I have a black layer mask, not a white one. So if I use a white brush, now what I can do is basically do it just as if I were burning and dodging, in this case burning, in the darkroom around these edges. A lot of times this makes it easier to work with. It seems to be more intuitive to some people, if you're going to darken the edges, to actually do that rather than having to lighten the center. And as always, if we get a little exuberant with it, and we didn't want to darken this area, we simply switch to a black brush, maybe a smaller one here. And lighten that back up. So there we are. Pretty little flower. Nice flower. And we still have this very cool out of focus background. Nice job with the depth of field part. Why, it's a pier. It appears to be a pier. And from this angle, it appears that the pier is falling over. Boy, I would hope not. I wouldn't want to be here when that happened. I don't know, because I don't know what pier this is, whether it really is falling over or whether it's just the keystone effect from the angle that you've shot at with a wider lens. But be aware that it is creating this sense of falling over, and that may or may not be what you want to get. We've got some flare down into here along with the spray from the water hitting the legs of the piers. That's pretty cool. Nice deep depth of field, everything from the front. You've got nice depth of field with everything from the front legs, or the ones closest to the camera, the foreground legs, to the back sharp. That all worked. And you've got a nice movement going through here, counterposed by these upright, although somewhat crooked, pier legs. So you did a pretty good job with this. The maximum depth of field concept works out well. You held that, got a good shot. I think this is the last one in our series. If it is, then wow, this has been an interesting group of pictures to look at. You all generally are doing really good controlling the depth of field. I'll be anxious to see how you do when you're really pushing it with the focus stack. So, see you next time. Take care.